It's taken me little over 100 hours to beat this game. I completely underestimated just how much content was into this game, and it still feels like I've only scratched the surface of all the things that happened in my 102-hour journey. It's been a few months since the actual release of the game, and there's been nothing but praise for this game. Background information on myself: I've never played a Dungeons and Dragons game, but did have an interest in playing it, and I never really played a CRPG before, but I mean, I played a lot of RPGs, so it wouldn't be the biggest hurdle for me to climb. So really, Baldur's Gate 3 for me was an intro to CRPGs and Dungeons and Dragons franchise. So I'm going to figure out if Baldur's Gate 3 is Game of the Year material. So after creating your character, you're immediately witnessing a tadpole being injected into you through your eyeball. Pretty disgusting. Not only you, but nearly everyone around you in the ship that you've been kidnapped into has all these tadpoles injected into you. This is really bad, as having these tadpoles can transform you into a mind flayer, which is basically like an ugly octopus being, at any given moment. Surprisingly, your tadpole is special as it doesn't transform you immediately, but it's only a matter of time before it will give in and turn you into a mind flayer. So when you escape the ship that you were kidnapped into, you meet other people who are in the same situation as you, and figure out any way to get rid of your tadpole. And from here, and depending on who you are and what choices you make, can greatly alter the encounters and events to come. Before I get into how I think of this story, I think it's important to mention how important character customization is for this game. My mistake was that the only thing that mattered here was the class because of stat point distribution. Your class and your race matters a lot here. I only played through the game as a rogue drow basically like an evil-ish elf. I chose to be a drow because I thought it looked cool. And sure enough, when I went into a goblin camp, they all worshipped me like a god, which I found weird at first because I didn't know it was because of my race. And in turn, if I went to like a more civilized settlement, there'd be a few people that gave me like the side eye. Yeah, so I can see this being entirely different for all different races with so many different interactions that you can get. That plus the actual class stat distribution, to where you might have better luck with intimidating people with your high strength stat, or just being very sly with high deception stat. Yeah, this makes the game highly replayable since you'll basically have a completely different new experience just based on how you create your character, which in my opinion is really, really cool. The story itself is pretty extensive, that there are a lot of quests and content to cover, especially for those that like to do every single little side quest. The entire game is split into 3 acts. Each act has like a corresponding zone with it. Can't go to like any previous or future zones. These are pretty big, so I never thought it was like restrictive in any way. I'm pretty sure they did this for story reasons, especially quest lines that carry over through the acts. Honestly, the main overarching story was decent. I liked Act 2 a lot. I personally thought the transition from Act 2 to Act 3 was a bit weird. It was probably because of like a weird like theme shift that made it a bit awkward for me, but Act 3 finale was how I expected it to be. So overall, I was pleased with the main quest line. The real highlight in my opinion was like the companion missions, and the quest line that was parallel with the main story, but technically not required, if that makes sense. I don't want to spoil anything, but you'll just have to trust me on this. I really do think the companion missions are really, really well made. They stretch through 3 acts of the entire game. Usually you see in other games where they get the spotlight for like maybe a mission or 2, and it's over. But in Baldur's Gate, you spend a lot of time with the problems that pertain to their quest line, and the cool part is that if you really, really hate that one guy for no apparent reason, for me it was Asterion, and you could not bring him to his own questline and still complete it. Obviously, you could miss out on some cool background story, or the questline revolves in a completely different manner because he wasn't there, he or she wasn't present in their own questline. But I thought it was cool that you weren't gated out in a particular content because you didn't bring a certain person with you. It feels like they thought of like every branching decision possible for each encounter or decision, which I think is really, really cool. I think the characters, especially the companions, are really good. I unfortunately did not find Lae'zel on my playthrough somehow. I don't understand. So I completely missed out on all her content. But with the other companions, there were a few that I liked, a few I didn't like. Like I said before, like Asterion, I did not like him. But obviously, tons of people love Asterion, so it's not a bad thing if you hate a certain person. You can get together a companion if that's what you're into. I got with Shadowheart, enjoyed all the lines that they added whenever it was appropriate. I think the companions are one of the game's main features, and they did a very good job in creating and fleshing out these characters. The graphics are, in my opinion, is actually pretty good, considering all like the gameplay elements that are like in the frame at any given moment. I think it's pretty good. It's not the greatest, but it's definitely servable and it works well. And as I said before, I've never played Dungeons & Dragons game or any CRPGs before, but I surprisingly caught on quickly with a lot of the mechanics of the game. I will say that there are a lot of mechanics and features that I've never seen before in other games that I've played, such as like the action, bonus actions, spell slot tokens during fights, the difference and importance of short rest and long rests, doing actions or picking choices that have like a higher chance of succeeding in dice rolls due to stats and buffs. There are a bit more micro things to learn, but as I said, there was a learning curve for me to understand the game. I do tend to pick up things a bit faster than others, but I will say that when you do understand more and more of the mechanics and logics of how things work, the more you'll enjoy the game. And you don't necessarily need to literally know everything about the game to enjoy or complete the game. I'm not even joking, it took me until like the latter half of Act 3, so like 60, 70 hours into the game, to realize I could multi-class. I was still having fun and getting through the content without knowing every single thing. Sure, it'll help, but doesn't mean you have to know it, which I think is pretty cool, as it's not seen in many games where you have to understand all the mechanics to succeed. Something like Fire Emblem Engage was a victim of this. If you were struggling unless you knew the new mechanics of like being promoted to a new class or learning skills, fortunately Baldur's Gate didn't make me feel like I was punished for not knowing all the things going on. The combat itself is a lot to grasp at, especially if you haven't played any strategy games similar to like Fire Emblem or XCOM, and even then, there are still things I needed to fully understand. It may seem like there are too many spells or actions that a character can do, but at least for me, not all of it is usable at that given moment. It's like having a toolbox full of different tools such as hammers, screwdrivers, rulers, or whatever. You're given tons of tools that you can work with in Baldur's Gate, but obviously, you don't use a ruler to nail down a plank or whatever. Just knowing what tool is used for different situations is important, and when something that you don't use actually gets used, it actually excites me a bit that a certain spell gets some love and is actually useful in that situation. Another thing that I liked was how they did the quest log, especially with how long and dense certain story aspects are. It's nice that they have like somewhat a summary of a particular quest line, and it changes depending on what actions or choices you make. The log never really explicitly says what you need to do, but rather summarizes what's happened, and you yourself, as the player, infer what you need to do or want to do. I thought this was pretty cool, and a reward for following along with the story and the choice that you've made. The exploration is also cool in the fact that the dice is always rolling, whether that's rolling to see if you notice that the hidden trap or treasure chest is there, understanding the religious statue before you, or noticing someone's twitch as they're speaking a lie to you. The dice is always rolling in the background, and your reward for either not dying, getting good loot, or even an extra dialogue choice. This makes every experience and playthrough distinctively different, especially if you decide to completely change up your party's comp or your character with a different set of stats distributions and specialties. Alright, some things I didn't really like. The leveling is a bit weird in my opinion. In the first few levels you level up pretty fast, then after that it takes a while to level up, so the XP curve and the level requirement is a bit harsh, but it isn't the worst I've seen. The thing that bugs me is that the level cap's at level 12. I got to the level cap around halfway through Act 3, but also in Act 3 I was gaining some big XP from some of the hard bosses and encounters that you do in Act 3, and since I was already at cap, it felt pointless and meaningless to gain these XP. I think I read somewhere that the devs capped it at 12, mostly from the fact that there are some crazy godlike spells like stopping time in the Dungeons and Dragons franchise. So then they would have to code everything with stopping time in mind, and the final boss has to be bigger and stronger than stopping time. That I totally understand. You definitely cap the level to preserve like the quality of the game, but you also have to reward those that are doing a lot of quests. Having like a side level stat kind of prestige could work. You'll still gain like a very minor stat boost off like leveling past the cap, but you still get reward for XP gains that you get. It could be something like, oh, I'm level 12 plus 1 or something. It just sucks that I hit the cap, then kill a bunch of like big bosses with big XP, but means nothing since I'm already at the level cap. I don't really know if this is a bug or it's on purpose, but there are some time-related quests that would just become dead ends because you did another quest before that particular quest. In other games, it would just like gray out or remove that quest. But in Baldur's Gate, it happened on a couple of occasions for me. I would show up at the destination, find nothing there. After 20 minutes of like running around in circles, checking every barrel, see if there's like a key or a button or whatever, and then nothing, I would resort to like a quick Google search and realize I did the quests in the wrong order. Yeah. So one, I wish they clearly communicated like the time-sensitive quests, and two, they should have like communicate that a quest is no longer relevant because you were too late in doing so, or you just did the quest in the wrong order. Again, it could be a bug, but if it's not, they need to like clearly communicate that. Thankfully, it only happened in the latter half of the game for me. Another thing I would like to see is more difficulty options. There have only been 2 instances where I lowered the difficulty from normal to easy for a fight out of my 100-hour adventure, so I think it's pretty good that there's only been 2 fights that I truly thought there was no way in hell I would beat it in normal. I'm worried about those that haven't played any like CRPGs, strategy, or even just RPGs at all. If there was something even easier than easy, maybe like a story mode, I think it'll attract even more people. And then for like hardcore people, you would add like an option to like lock your difficulty to where you can't change it like once you start the game. I think that would be a nice touch. Just a bit more difficulty options. Baldur's Gate 3 is a great game. The story is phenomenal, the characters are really good and very fleshed out, the combat is very strategic and very enjoyable, and learning more and more skills is very rewarding. Getting a hit of dopamine when you get a rare piece of gear never gets old. For anyone who's even somewhat interested in Dungeons & Dragons or even Baldur's Gate itself will no doubt enjoy the game. It may take a few hours to get used to the mechanics, but if you somewhat understand a decent amount, you'll get some value out of it. Now, the real question. Is it Game of the Year material? It really depends on what you define as Game of the Year. Obviously, a singular person's Game of the Year is a very personal opinion on what they think Game of the Year is. So as of right now, Baldur's Gate 3 is my personal Game of the Year. But can I recommend this game to just the average person? Not really. Like, to me, a proper Game of the Year is something that either is like a video game breakthrough or targets a large audience that a good amount of people could play. Breath of the Wild is a good example. It was game breaking, inspired a lot of like newer open world games that take like elements from Breath of the Wild. Last year, 2022, I honestly thought Xenoblade Chronicles 3, even though I played it this year, should have won it. Yes, Elden Ring was a good game, but Xenoblade Chronicles 3 just did something different and just felt like a breath of fresh air after playing like through the entirety of it. So is Baldur's Gate 3 like a people's Game of the Year? It can be. If it was any other year, definitely, for sure. But this year, so many other big games it's pretty tough to figure out what game I'd be comfortable recommending to just about anyone. Baldur's Gate 3's like steep learning curve makes me hesitant, as I would only recommend it to people who have played like a long RPG or a strategy game before, which isn't really the majority of all gamers. Even though I never played Spider-Man 2, Spider-Man 2 is the type of game that you could recommend the game to just about anyone, as long as they know how to like hold the controller, and you'll find a lot of value in it. Baldur's Gate has a bit too many prerequisites for it to be for like the average people's Game of the Year. But like I said before, Baldur's Gate 3 is a wonderful game. It's my personal Game of the Year. But I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't win the Game of the Year award, only because it appeals to a portion of all gamers in the spectrum. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. I plan on doing more of these reviews for any game that I decide to play, and there is a chance that I will be streaming them. See you later.